Well, I know that. You can't help you swear.
Well, this weekend, we had an open house.
Monday, May 18th. Could we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
Present.
Councilmember Bruno.
Here.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Drosha.
Here.
Councilmember Ferris.
Here.
Councilmember Mulvaney.
Present.
Mayor Waltz.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Will you please rise and join in the Pledge of Allegiance and invocation led by Councilmember Clark?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lord, we thank you for the many blessings that you bestowed upon us and our community. We ask you over all of those that are hurting and in need, and you shall help them, and as always, we ask your protective arms around our men and women who serve both here and overseas in the military, and make sure that they return home safely. Amen.
Did you do your check, John? Item 4 on the agenda this evening is announcements. Are there any announcements this evening? Mr. Colburn?
Honorable Mayor and Council members, tonight I'd like to announce that David Haywood, our Zoning and Development Director, has been working towards the nationally recognized certification of the AICP, which is the American Institute, the American Institute of Certified Planners. Now, this is a portion of the American Planning Association, and what it is really is it's a career step that's important within the profession. It basically means that he's got a certain level of not just education, but experience. And in essence, to prepare for this, it takes about 100 hours of study. It certainly makes him a better planner, keeping up with the profession. It exposes him to and updating the field in terms of his educational base, and in terms of working with the network of professional planners as well. So I just wanted to point out that he's continuing his education in this field, and has been formally recognized by the American Institute of Certified Planners. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Colburn. I think if we'd have known about that about an hour ago, a proclamation could have been made at the joint recognition ceremony at the high school. So since that didn't happen, will everybody please join me in applauding Mr. Haywood? Are there any other announcements? I have one. I received a call just before the joint recognition ceremony from our County Commissioner, Robin Nayert, and she would like to be able to give us a brief presentation and some commentary on some things of interest to her, although she's presently at a meeting of the Human Services Committee for the county in Lansing, so she may not be able to appear until the end of the agenda. So to be procedurally correct on that, it would be appropriate if we amended the agenda to allow a presentation at the end.
Mr. Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that we amend the agenda to include a presentation from County Commissioner Robin Nayert as item 14 and move adjournment to item 15.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to add presentations as item 14 and move adjournment to 15. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes 7-0.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Drosha.
I did think of an announcement, as long as we're still in announcements.
We still are.
Thursday Night Live series begins this Thursday night with both middle school and high school jazz bands on the lawn of the courthouse starting at 6 p.m.
Thank you, Councilmember Drosha. Are there any other announcements? Item 5, the agenda, people from the floor. Is there anybody that wishes to address the council this evening? If so, please approach the podium and state your name and address, and we'll give you approximately 3 minutes.
My name's Russ Whipple, 322 Lawton Street. I'm also a lieutenant on the Mason Fire Department. Last meeting at your during your budget public hearing, I brought to you a proposal for funding the replacement of fire trucks. I wanted to first of all react, I guess, to some further contemplation that's gone on with that. If you recall, what I suggested was that the city create what in the budget I think is called a department, but essentially another section of the fire department budget, which could be called vehicle replacement, whatever you want to call it, and that area of the budget be initially capitalized with money from the city's fund balance. I prepared a spreadsheet simulation, if you will, over 30, 40 years that showed how this might work to replace the fire trucks on a schedule. And the idea of this fund would be that initial capital would be used to purchase the first fire truck outright, and then the fire department budget would pay into this vehicle replacement fund as if it was amortizing the cost of that truck over some period of time. My proposal had 10 years for the amortization, and it had 25 years for the life of the major fire trucks. The chief's car and whatnot was 10 years, and I think grass rig was 20. I can't remember for sure. The main reason I wanted to come to you tonight was to cover a couple things. One is I look at that plan or the proposal, that spreadsheet, as a worst-case scenario. The 25 years comes from the NFPA standard, which I believe doesn't say that trucks should be replaced after 25 years. It simply at this time says trucks that were built before 1990 should be replaced. Well, that was 25 years ago. The beauty of the proposal is the city can do whatever you want. You can make that 30 years, you can make it 35, you can make it 50. The point of the whole thing is to make the replacement of fire trucks a planned activity. You currently have the motor vehicle pool in the city budget, and it's my understanding, I may be wrong, but just about every other wheeled vehicle that's not in the fire department is in the motor vehicle pool somehow. I may be wrong on that, but I know it's the vast majority of them. And that includes mowers and trailers and everything. This is not, I'm not proposing another motor vehicle pool because for simplicity, in my mind, now maybe the city administration, the council would think differently. I don't see any reason to manage maintenance out of this fund, and the motor vehicle pool manages maintenance of these things. But the motor vehicle pool is structured, as I understand it, at least it used to be, very similarly. It buys vehicles and rents them to departments. That rent funds the motor vehicle pool so it can then buy another vehicle on a schedule. So police cars and, pickup trucks for the DPW, the chief's command car, the lawnmowers and whatnot. Those all have a formal, funded, managed plan for replacement. Fire trucks do not. And it just seems to me that that's really a hole, if you will, in the city's budget or the city's planning. I look at this as a true capital improvement plan. I know the city has a capital improvement plan, manages all of our assets. We have a list of fire trucks, and the capital improvement plan for the list of fire trucks is essentially what they are when they were put in service and what we think it will cost to replace them. This puts a financial mechanism behind that capital improvement plan. This is actually a capital improvement plan, the proposal. I want to encourage the city to implement this plan as soon as possible. I think we're planning to buy a fire truck this year or in the next fiscal year, and then possibly another one the following fiscal year because we have a 30-year-old truck and a 25-year-old truck. It would seem the perfect time when the city's fund balance does have sufficient money to cover the initial capital in this, and it could be managed, I think, very, very easily and quickly right out of the get-go, and you'd see in a few years a great benefit to the city because you wouldn't have to deal with a fire truck purchase, which is a huge purchase. It's the most expensive vehicle we buy. And we have 5 of them that are really expensive. And so I would hope that the council in their budget adoption tonight
would make sure that included in that is a set aside of that initial capital. You can use my plan, you can use your own numbers. My plan suggested $600,000 because it anticipated purchasing 2 trucks essentially right away. You could probably scale that down a little bit, but the bottom line is the spreadsheet, if you know anything about spreadsheets, allows you to change those numbers and see how it would affect things. I see this as something the chief would review every year at budget time, along with the city administrator and the finance director, and they would look at the performance to date. How much money is going into the fund? What are we looking to purchase in the next few years? Does it look like it's all going to work out? And the number can be adjusted. I used in my plan, essentially, an amortization schedule where I used an interest rate. Really, for lack of a better word, that's really an inflation rate, because you're not paying interest because it's going to you. But you are paying an inflation rate because we don't know what trucks are going to cost in the future, and we always assume they're going to cost more than they do now. And that's pretty standard with the budget. I suspect the motor vehicle pool does the same thing. I guess I'll just close with, I would hope the city would be bold in this. It's the time to be bold. I think there's some trepidation on the part of some council members, maybe on the staff. It's a new thing. It's a lot of money. But you buy the fire trucks anyway. The cost to the city over time is actually probably no different. In fact, it's probably less. In fact, I know it's less because you won't borrow from outside to pay for a fire truck. You'll never pay interest to somebody else. So the cost will be lower. So it'll be better for the people, it'll be better for you and your budget, it'll be better for the townships who pay for our services. And be bold, implement this plan or something similar to this, get off the schneid that the city's been on for decades. I was on this council 20 years ago was when I first got on, over 20 years ago. And this was talked about then. And this should just be done. The city's in a financial position to make it happen. The plans are in place. We have vehicles we can purchase. We know the numbers are pretty solid for the first couple. And I think the city would be remiss if they didn't take advantage of this opportunity and put something in place immediately and not buy a single truck in the future from the fire department that involves giving money to anybody but us. Any money in addition to what the truck actually costs. Let's plan for it and make fire trucks just as important as every other wheeled vehicle that the city has that's in the motor vehicle pool. I would venture to guess that although I believe all vehicles the city uses, their assets, they're important, they have a purpose, a fire truck's a lot more important than a lawnmower. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. Also, I appreciate you sending this spreadsheet to me after the last council meeting with the public hearing, and also your roughly 3-page document on the mechanics of how that worked. I did forward that on to the entire council through email, and I understand city staff has been in receipt of it also. So thanks again for your interest and the work you put into this. Are there any questions for Mr. Whipple? Is there anybody else that wishes to address the council from the floor? Thank you. Item 6 on the agenda is the consent agenda, consisting of the approval of minutes from the council meeting of May 4th, 2015, approval of the bills, and a motion to have the street closures for the Memorial Day Parade on Monday.
Mr. Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
If there are no items that wish to be removed, I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to approve the consent agenda as presented. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Clark.
Just a typo on page 1. The Mason Softball Association is a 501c3.
I'm sorry, page what?
Page 1 of the minutes under public.
Okay, I see.
Public after the public hearing.
Okay, the minutes will reflect that that's a 501c3 rather than a 301c. Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Item 7, regular business. First is a resolution 2015-20, declaring an additional temporary moratorium on the issuance of licenses for primary caregiver operations and dispensaries in the City of Mason. Mr. Colburn?
Honorable Mayor and Council members, as you know, we have timelines based to the moratoriums. We have Zoning and Development Director David Haywood, who's been working with the Planning Commission on this committee, and he's ready to present the discussion to you.
David Haywood, Zoning and Development Director. Before you is a request, recommendation from the Planning Commission to declare a new moratorium on the existing medical marijuana ordinance for the purpose of basically buying us more time to continue our research, developing a community input strategy, and explore sample ordinances and the like. The committee's been actively meeting in this arena, and we're very close to scheduling and announcing public input meetings. I also am lucky enough to have an intern, Thomas Girdwood from MSU School of Planning. He's been working on this, assembling some background data, collecting ordinances and analyzing the ordinances and categorizing them for all the different categories and the different issues that come up in all of the ordinances. We're exploring our closest neighbors and what their ordinances are. Both Aladdin and Vive have an ordinance on this issue, so we're staying in close contact with them, so we understand how they're handling these issues in their community, and we'll report back to you as we move forward. So at this point, we've not developed a draft and need additional time to do so, so the Planning Commission is recommending an additional moratorium. And with that, I'll take any questions or comments.
Are there any questions for Mr. Haywood? Thank you, Mr. Haywood.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Grosha.
I move that we consider resolution number 2015-20 as being read.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to have resolution number 2015-20 as considered read. Is there any discussion?
Yes, just one small question. Have we heard anything about the reaction from East Lansing?
Well, this discussion is to consider it read. You can ask that after.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
So hold that thought. All those in favor of considering motion resolution 2015-20 as considered read, signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Is there any discussion on the resolution? Councilmember Ferris.
Just any reaction.
Have her read it into the...
Yes.
Oh,
Go ahead.
after
After we do the formality.
do you have one to introduce?
Yes, I do. City Council Resolution number 2015-20. A resolution declaring an additional temporary moratorium on the issuance of licenses for primary caregiver operations and dispensaries in the City of Mason. Introduced by Clark, second by Bruno.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the resolution?
Thank you. I'd like to ask Chief Strassman if he's had any result or any discussion with East Lansing. East Lansing just passed the last election that it was okay to have up to 1 ounce of marijuana on your property and over adults over 21, and it passed resoundingly.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. I'm John Strussman, Chief of Police. Reference to the East Lansing ordinance. To be honest with you, I haven't paid a lot of attention to that one. What concerns me more right now is a bill introduced in the legislature that would allow medical marijuana card holders to have a certain level of THC in their systems and be exempt because they are card holders. In other words, they can drive under the influence of the THC without fear of prosecution. Don't know if that's going to see the light of day. It's only has one sponsor at this point, as I recall, as of last week. So maybe nothing, who knows. But I expect we'll hear more on the issue.
Thank you for the update.
Thank you. Any other?
Thank you, Chief. Councilmember Drosha? Did you? Oh, okay.
The only comment I have is I hope the food truck ordinance doesn't take as long as this one to develop.
Any other discussion on Resolution 2015-20? Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to acknowledge, as the liaison to the Planning Commission, the hard work that they've been doing. Thanks to Mr. Haywood and a dedicated subcommittee that has been meeting regularly to discuss this issue. Normally when we approach these moratoria, we have discussions about whether or not we're simply delaying or kicking the can down the road. But in this case, I think the landscape is continuing to change. The chief has made reference to bills that are in the state legislature, and I believe hearings have been scheduled concerning several of these bills. And if anybody looks at what the city of Mason has been doing on this, we've, since the last time we extended the moratorium, we've had a joint meeting with the Planning Commission and had a very healthy discussion on that. And all of our Planning Commission meeting minutes detail reports of the subcommittee's work. And so I respect their work and I'm appreciative for their work, and I think that in order to allow them to continue to do a thorough and comprehensive job and also engage the public on this important issue, that the moratorium is indeed appropriate. And so those are my comments in support of the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Other comments? I agree that the formation of the subcommittee for the Planning Commission has been an advantage for us, and it does help us meet some of the criteria to request a moratorium. In particular, that we are continuing to work on this issue and do our due diligence rather than apparently doing nothing or kicking the can down the road, as my colleague has stated, and then ask for moratoriums. So I, too, will be supporting this and the efforts of the Planning Commission as they continue on with this, trying to hit a moving target. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of Resolution 2015-20 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
Resolution passes 6-1. 7B, regular business, is Resolution 2015-21, addressing fireworks. I do acknowledge that we have the fire chief on the floor today, as well as the lead shooter. And I will turn this over to Mr. Colburn for any necessary updates or introductions.
Honorable Mayor and council members, we are sticking with the plan from last year. As you recall, we moved it from the fairgrounds eastward to Temple Street in terms of some of the safety due to the construction of a new building on the fairgrounds. This is pretty standardized. We do have Chief Minshaw and Lieutenant Sabata in here if you have any questions or direction that you feel we need to discuss.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Drosha.
I move that we consider Resolution 2015-21 as read.
I second the motion.
Resolution's been made and seconded to consider Resolution 2015-21 as being read. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the resolution being considered read signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Do you have one to introduce?
Yes, I do. City Council Resolution number 2015-21, request to hold a fireworks display and for a street closure. Introduced by Clark, second by Bruno.
Thank you. Any discussion on the resolution? All those in favor of Resolution 2015-21 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Resolution passes 7-0. Item 7C on the agenda, Resolution 2015-22, is the final step in our annual budget process, adopting the fiscal year 2015-2016 budget. as required by our charter. It needs to be done by this evening. At this point, I will invite Mr. Colburn to comment on anything where we are at with this process. You've had the opportunity to review additional material, and it should have been included in email for everybody in council as well. Mr. Colburn.
Honorable Mayor and council members, through the process that we utilized, we met January 31st on goals and objectives, followed through with a couple of workshops in regard to the budget as well as a public hearing. This budget is proposed at $14,977,085 from all funds. It's also inclusive of the DDA and the LDFA TIFs, and is presented to you for this evening with the inclusiveness of the additions the council made in regard to the additional police officer, the concrete work on West Columbia, and fire apparatus. And the millage is referenced at 13.25, and it has been published as such. And the budget is now prepared for your final approval.
Thank you, Mr. Colburn. Mr. Smith, would you like the opportunity to comment on the budget that's been proposed at this point as well?
Sure. I guess what items would you like me to address? Would you like me to address some of the areas that were in the plan that's in front of, or that has been proposed? Or would you like me to tell you which way I would support this budget? Because I guess in response to some of the earlier comments, I can say that the fund balance that does appear high, a lot of the elements that created that fund balance, like charter provisions to waive street construction, like unsettled contracts, like vacancies, like there's several things that had come together that are going to utilize that fund balance just as quickly. That's one thing I would like to point out. I know it appears high, and I do see that, but a lot of the items that were included that made it high are going to utilize it just as quickly. Another thing I would like to, first of all, do is tell Mr. Whipple that I do appreciate the proposal and the work he put into this. But one of the biggest items that I do see here is that it only addresses fire apparatus. And I ran it through several models with just minor increases in revenue and expenditures and all the other expenditures that are there outside of just purchasing the apparatus. And at our current revenue base, we could not sustain this plan for 5 years. And I went through to see we are not as cash heavy as this plan would propose, and it would deplete our reserves within a short period of time. It's not even a long period of time that we could sustain it. It's an aggressive utilization of fund balance. And honestly, in my opinion, if we were going to consider aggressively utilizing it, there are some other needs of the city at some other areas, like our pension funding level, like our OPEB. We have contracts coming up this next year already that are going to be starting to negotiate, and there's other items and other needs that are also an important thing to consider when we think about a plan that goes out a significant amount of time. I might have a little bit of a different thought if this wasn't a budget that already, it addresses fire apparatus, and it addresses it even more aggressively than it originally had. I haven't really noticed where the city or the townships have exhibited behavior that they weren't going to continue to contribute towards fire apparatus. The plan in front of us addresses two apparatus in accelerated fashion. It's been gone over by Marty and the chief with townships. They're on board with continuing to contribute after this. There was no sign of stopping. So I guess in a nutshell, I would say that I support the budget that's in front of you for the simple fact that it does support the apparatus. And it also doesn't take our fund balance at a rate that we may not meet some of our other needs in the future. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Clark.
I'd like to ask Mr. Smith how you said that you have a budget. We have a budget in front of us that addresses the purchases of fire trucks. I don't see that in there. Where is it? Other than the loan that you want to take out? Is that what you're talking about?
Actually, the loan actually has two, and then there was going to be a accelerated purchase of another truck based on a build that would, from the way that I understand it, would have this vehicle during this next budget year. That's why the loan amount went up approximately $56,000 from what it currently is. The townships had been participating in about a $97,000 portion of their agreement with the city. That portion of the township contribution was going to increase based on purchasing fire trucks sooner.
Okay, I guess I'll be more specific with my question. Can you show me a specific line item in here that says that this is what we're spending, particularly for the purchase of fire trucks in the current budget?
It's in the fire department in the general fund tab in your book, but it is in the fire department total expenditures. That's what the debt service there. Although it does have a small payment for the fire station in it, it is a portion of the debt service section within your budget.
And that's the debt service on the existing debt.
No. Actually, no. That includes the additional payment as well, as if we're going to get the truck during the fiscal year.
That's good planning. I don't know. We don't know what that payment's going to be. Correct?
We had an estimate as to what we thought the truck build would be, and yes, you're correct. The interest rates are an estimate, and so is the total cost of the truck. If we're lucky, it will come in actually on a lesser, but I don't know that. In fact, we had an estimate on a conservative basis.
Any other questions for Mr. Smith? Thank you for providing that update and analysis. Mayor Pro Tem.
So that we can get this on the floor, I move that we consider Resolution 2015-22 as having been read.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to have Resolution 2015-22 considered as being read. Any discussion? All those in favor of the resolution being considered as read signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Do you have a resolution to introduce?
Yes, I do. City Council Resolution number 2015-22, adoption of the fiscal year 2015-2016 budget, introduced by Bruno, second by Clark.
Thank you. Any discussion on the resolution? Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know that we're going to have probably some significant discussion on the full budget, but before we proceed with that, I do have an amendment that I would like to propose to the council this evening. Each member of council has been provided a hard copy of the amendment, and I will read it as follows. I move to amend the proposed 2015-2016 fiscal year budget currently on file in the office of the city clerk as follows. Item number 1, Department 758, Public Art, that we add funding in the amount of $1,000 to support current and future projects related to both the fine and performing arts. Item number 2, Department 808, Planning Commission, that we add funding in the amount of $340 to support conferences, workshops, training, seminars, and membership dues to professional organizations for members of the Mason Planning Commission. And item 3, that we adjust the surplus to fund balance, all subtotals, all totals, and resolution number 2015-22 accordingly. And that is the full amendment.
Support.
Motion's been made and seconded to make the amendment as read by Mayor Pro Tem Brown, essentially identifying funding for $1,340 and adjusting the balances accordingly. And everybody has a copy of that motion. Do you have a copy, Madam Clerk?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on that motion? Mayor Pro Tem. Just 1 second, Councilmember Bruno. Mayor Pro Tem.
I'd like to speak to it as the maker.
Disregard, Councilmember Bruno.
No, I was saying I would like to speak to it.
You would.
Sorry. As the maker of the amendment, I would like to simply speak to the purpose of it and what is included. During our budget work sessions, there were several times that I brought up two items that I thought were important and would like to see addressed in the budget. The first item I will speak to is the Planning Commission training and conferences line. Currently, the budget includes the amount of about $600 for that line, $660. And what this amendment does is adds $340 to that line, takes the Planning Commission conferences and trainings line up to $1,000. That equates to about $125 for each of the 8 commissioners, excluding myself from this. And the reason why I'm proposing that particular component is because we are actually asking, including our Planning Commission in a lot of our deliberations, whether it's medicinal marijuana, whether it's looking at possibility of food truck ordinances, or even as they continue to look at doing sub-area plans as an amendment to the master plan. And I would like to ensure that whatever trainings, whatever professional memberships, if it's the American Planning Association or what have you, that we avail the resources to those individuals that are volunteering their time and their effort to work for the city and to make wise decisions as planning commissioners. So that was the first item. The second is proposing that we reinstate a line item that has been in prior year budgets, and that is the public art line. And this sort of goes back to when we originally received the LEAP grant and began public art in the city with the Silver Respite project. At that time, the City Council passed a public art policy that said we would dedicate 0.1% of our budget towards these purposes. Unfortunately, we have not been able to fulfill this particular policy. But what my amendment does is it at least moves us in that direction. $1,000 is a small amount, but I think it would go a far way in either one, addressing some of the additional components of Silver Respite that we wanted to include with the original project, or two, supporting other art projects that are going on in the city or potentially new art projects should we receive additional grant funding. These two items together total $1,340, and out of the close to $7 million general fund budget is approximately 0.02% of the budget. And so I would respectfully ask my colleagues to consider supporting this amendment as it will enhance a budget that I feel is already a good budget. But these are two areas that I think were mistakenly not included in our current budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Bruno.
Mayor Waltz, is Mayor Pro Tem Brown on numerous occasions has said we can amend this budget at any time. So I can't really see the need to put this in when we have everything covered and we've discussed this. And now to come up with these items of $1,340, which is to me nothing, but it's just a principle of the issue. We amend the budget quarterly. If those expenses come up during the time, we can always adjust it at any time, so I will not support it.
Any other discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of Mayor Pro Tem Brown's amendment as read signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Amendment to the resolution passes 5-2. Is there any further discussion on the resolution?
You're talking about the main resolution
Yes.
of the budget? Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Clark.
I guess I'd like to go back to what Mr. Smith said earlier. So what you're saying is that the additional capital outlay of $40,000 is what goes into the fire department budget for fire truck purchase? That's the capital outlay. The only other amount in there is $97,085 for the current loan payment.
There should have been an updated amount in the loan payment that went from $97,085 to $153,680 in the latest one that was done at the last meeting. That's been the common practice. We haven't handed out new sheets to you, but when we discussed this at the last meeting, that is where this would have gone. Is in, I said debt service. It's classified as loan payments, but it went from $97,085 to $153,680, and that is where that would be incorporated. So, yeah, again, it would have been in the public copy there when we did it. We've never, at least not in my over 13 of these, passed out another one at the public hearing there with these changes. The changes that would have had the officer, this loan payment, those types of items that were in the last one were not. They were in the public copy and they were updated and placed there for public viewing, but they were not new.
So we didn't get them.
No,
they were in the public copy.
I've got my copy here.
They were in the last packet as well, I believe. Yeah, they were in the last packet.
I guess I don't see it either, man.
Irregardless, I guess the point is that once again we're going to follow the path that we've been on for the last 10 or 20 years. We're now saying that we're going to go out and borrow some more money to replace a truck. We've bumped the schedule, but as soon as those trucks are paid for, who knows what the plan's going to be at that time. I think that Mr. Whipple brings forward a proposal that addresses an issue that we've been battling for a long, long time. It's not a new concept, I will say that, because in my time here on the council, I can recall one time, I believe it was Councilmember Bruno, that suggested that we fund a project by loaning the money to ourselves and paying ourselves back. I think that that makes sense to me. I think that I agree with Mr. Whipple from the standpoint that we have a mechanism for funding that you can readily go to in this budget that covers every piece of wheeled equipment that we have except for fire trucks. And we've been limping along for years. We're now in a position where we can fix that, and I think it's most important that we go with either that plan specifically or something very, very similar.
First, I would just like to support Mr. Smith's effort to try to point where this amount appears. It was in the new recommended budget of April 18th. It's on page 4. Well, that's not right. Page 4 of 18. It's on April 30th was the date of it. Page 4 of 18 on the far right column, 2015-16 recommended budget. The final item for the fire department was capital outlay other, $153,680 was the amount. So if that helps you find it, it was what was provided to us the night of our public hearing.
Mayor Waltz.
Councilmember Bruno.
It's not that much different than if you just add the 40,000 that's below it. You're only 20,000 difference.
Correct. Councilmember Ferris.
What I was going to suggest is that we have the next truck in the works, that we have time before the next budget to look at some alternatives and to see what we can work out. Thank you.
Thank you. Other discussion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember
I guess
Clark.
if I have to, I'll make a motion to amend the budget to set aside $600,000 in the line item in the fire department budget for the purchase of fire trucks.
Support.
Motion's been made and seconded to set aside $600,000 in that line item for purchase of fire trucks. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Mulvaney.
Mr. Mayor, would Mr. Smith react to what that does to the surplus, including the other obligations on the surplus fund that he alluded to?
Mr. Smith, do you need a few minutes to crunch those numbers, or do you have a...
As far as looking at $600,000 all at once, again, we already said that would take about 10% away. Okay. But I can tell you that based on a couple of the models with just like 2% increases, no additional capital, right off the bat, just the $350,000 right off the bat takes us down to starting around 30%, and then by the end of next year with the $250 plus the contributions, we'd be down at like 20%, and by the following year we'd be under the recommended amount significantly already within 3 years. Within 5 years, our fund balance would be depleted. So again, I ran these through models, and there's many more obligations than just the apparatus, and we keep looking at this as if we got a huge fund balance that is going to be used when we do street construction in its full capacity, and it's going to be used when we have less vacancies and fully employed here, and the benefits are changing. We have the pension funding. So again, as I look at it, we want to take $600,000 out of this. It's still somewhere approximately around 10% of what would have been the recommended fund balance, and we'd be setting it aside by committing it by council, and that's a recommended method by the auditors and the GASB standards. So as far as setting aside a fund or a department, I've already spoken with the auditors on the preferred method and how that goes based on the current GASB standards and how we would take care of that, which again, we can set aside some money each year and the council can commit it, and quite frankly, it can still be addressed through the budget process, and it stays within our fiscal policies, and the chief has input, and the council has input, and the city administrator has input. But as far as this type of this magnitude, we would be cash poor in a short period of time based on these basic models that I've thrown these numbers into, and that was with a $350 this year and a $250 the following year from somewhere, plus the contributions. We would already be pushing being below any recommended minimum fund balance that the auditors have stated, and that's recommended minimums when they start talking about 20%. So
after how many years?
We would be below that within 3 years based on this. So again, as far as like I said, I appreciate the plan, but it's more aggressive than our cash can actually fund based on some basic models, and that doesn't include the goals and objectives that have been we've had sessions to try and come up with, along with some of the other items. This only addresses fire apparatus, and I got to reiterate, I do support it, and this budget does have apparatus in it. I know it may not be the method that everybody wants, but it is addressed in this budget, and again, that's why I would continue to say that I support this budget.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Mulvaney, does that answer your questions, or do you have other follow-up?
Well, in follow-up, what I think that we are considering here is two fire apparatus over the next 2 budget years, which could be estimated at somewhere around $750,000 to $800,000. Another $97,000 to pay off the balances of the 2 fire trucks that are already under bonds, and then another $600,000 for reduction of the surplus into fire truck fund. I seem to be coming up with not much less than about $1,400,000 out of 2 budget years, and I think maybe we could do that if you want to raise a millage, $1.5 or something like that. But I think it would require that.
Mr. Smith, in that scenario that you just gave us that would have us below recommended minimums after 3 years, I believe you said,
by 3 years.
What impact does an outright purchase over the year or 2 years of $600,000 in apparatus, the cost that's passed on to the townships, what impact would that have on our formula, the equation that we have them reimburse us for those expenditures?
Well, in the first year, both of them talked about having $350,000 come out. And when you do that, what it does is it takes the next year to already losing a little over $560,000. Well, the way the accounting standards work now, basically we already know that we assign 1% of the fund balance for grant matching. Well, the amount that you plan to lose the subsequent year is not available because you're already planning to use it. So that starts us out again, same scenario, 30% right off the bat. It's not 38, it's not 35, it's 30%. So in that scenario, by the third year, we'd be at about 21%. And again, these are complete estimates trying to project out just minor expense increases, but it doesn't address capital or additional pension funding or anything else besides the fire apparatus. So you're still looking at just over 3 years, and it's in a little better shape than it would be under the plan with the contributions and some of the purchases, but it doesn't, over a longer term, it's still very aggressive with our cash and our available fund balance.
Okay. The follow-up question, we had just negotiated contracts with the townships that took into account that let me back up. We had negotiated contracts based on a $97,000 legacy payment, which we then have since gone back and talked to them about. If this budget is approved as presented, we up that from the $97,000, we add another $56,000 roughly in a payment. And so we had to renegotiate the agreement and see if we had support from the townships to pay their share of that operating cost that we are now incurring. But if we change that from $56,000 to $600,000, that formula to the township and their ability to pay comes into question. As I had stated in the previous council meetings, I'm very concerned about our consideration to the townships and how our decision might impact their partnerships with us and their ability to continue to work with us and vice versa. And so that's probably the bigger question as far as the townships right now. And do you have a number of what that now becomes versus their share of the...
Just a comment to that. For one, they are only participating in a portion of that. Two, they're not really participating in the $600,000. They'd be participating in more of the contribution, what we'd be setting aside, whether it's a fund, whether it's committed fund balance. It's set aside by resolution for a specific purpose, and it would be. But that amount, even under the scenario in the second year, goes to like $194,000 versus, again, from 97 to 153, and it escalates as well. And again, they're only participating on a portion of that. But just you're asking me the question of what kind of difference. They would not be going directly for the $600,000. They'd still, to my knowledge, the way this scenario would play out, they would be going towards what we are contributing, which takes into account amortizing these and amounts that it would take for future purchases. They're not really going into the large amount one for one, and that's and again, looking at these models, as Russ said, there's potential for looking into being able to tweak these, but I guess, does that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Clark.
I guess I'm not the finance guy. I work in basic numbers, but I'm having a hard time understanding how it is if we take a one-time $600,000 one time and put it into a line item fund that the fire department budget continues to pay back as they use it over the years, is going to drain our fund balance. It's a one-time shot. And so far as the townships are concerned, the townships pay us on a contract basis a set amount of money that we determine where it's going to go. We determine whether we're going to use part of that money to buy turnout gear. We're going to determine whether or not they're going to put it towards fire trucks, whatever the case may be, their contract price may or may not change depending on what's negotiated in the next contract, specifically because of what we do with purchasing our fire trucks. They don't own the fire trucks. We do. They pay us on a contract basis. We decide where that money is going to be allocated, what it's going to buy. If we want to take the entire $100,000 that it is that they want to give us, that they give us under their contract, and say we're going to put that whole amount towards the purchase of fire trucks, we can do that. Or we can take half of it and put it towards turnout gear, whatever the case may be. None of this has any impact on them other than when we go to negotiate a brand new contract with them, it may be a little bit higher because our costs have gone up a little bit. So I wanted to clear that up, but I still am having a hard time understanding how a one-time transfer of $600,000 into a line item budget in the fire department that's going to be paid back as it's used from the fire department budget is going to drain the surplus.
Other comments?
Yes.
Councilmember Grosha.
Well, the attractive part for me of Mr. Whipple's proposal is that we pay interest to ourselves rather than paying interest to a bank. Is there a number, if it's not 600,000, maybe 400,000, that works better for this and doesn't deplete our resources?
The one scenario I said was already at 350,000, and we weren't going to be going to be able to sustain it for more than a short period of time. The city would be depleted in not even really a medium length of time. And again, these are really not as big of expense increases and other goals that we've talked about wanting to address with these budgets. And when you look at that, and I keep saying if you're gonna set it aside, it's coming away from what's available. And when you say you're going to set it aside and pay for it, it does not leave us cash or unassigned fund balance, which is what we are working with. The cash available to use. You set $600,000 aside, but even if you're going to pay for it over 50 years, it's not available next year. And the fact is, we keep saying that if we take $600,000 out, we're okay because we're going to pay it back. But the fact is, the balance that we have that's available will be much, much lower, and it'll be lower right away. And that's also assuming that, again, that our current tax base and our expenses, that our revenues are covering our expenses to a point where this fund balance was created, and that's not what created it. What created it was primarily driven by our street program and grants that Marty he chased down. And the fact is, income from all sources sometimes helps, and Marty did a lot of work chasing down some grants, and it's been helpful and beneficial in raising this. But as you look at these street programs going up from contributing, $600,000, $700,000 to $800,000, $900,000 plus, and that's ongoing. I don't see any large grants in our immediate future. I hope so. I hope we find some, but at this point, taking $600,000 out of that and putting it, commit it, assign it, it wouldn't matter if you put it in another fund. It still wouldn't be there, and it wouldn't be available for use. And it depletes us in a hurry. And that is basic accounting in that sense, because it's not going to be available for use. So, I'm trying to answer it as easy as possible without trying to go through accounting standards and how our fund balance has to be carried. But the fact is, we only have certain fund balance that is available for use, and obviously that wouldn't be if you set it aside.
Mr. Colburn.
I see how we have this current budget as a win-win, and I'll speak first to the fire services and then the budget as a whole. We have in here the two apparatuses. We've even sped up the timeline. I spoke with the chief in regards to the timing of when we can get delivery of those apparatuses. It's going to take 6 to 10 months to have the apparatuses built anyhow. But the fact of the matter is that we've accelerated the program to have 2 fire apparatuses come on board in fairly short order. Secondly, we have a CIP that's in place. We've been utilizing a different program, but I think it's time to take a look at this new formula that was presented, keep in mind, less than 2 weeks ago. And so we have run the models. I've looked at them with Eric. I agree with him. I think that there's issues, and it doesn't even address a lot of other goals and objectives that the City Council has addressed to me and to the staff in regard to trying to look at the broader picture. And that's what a CIP is for. It's for a planning process. This all has evolved literally over the last 2 weeks. And I would recommend move forward. It's a win-win in terms of the current year of the budget in regard to a budget that's meeting and addressing a lot of different goals of the council. It's addressing the goals of the fire department in terms of the fire apparatuses. And it gives us time this next year to work with all parties in regard to developing just that much of a stronger and better CIP next year. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Clark.
I guess I'd like to ask then the question, where in the CIP is the vehicle for funding fire department apparatus?
We have listed, and I'm going off memory because I don't have the CIP in front of me, but I believe there's 2 funding mechanisms listed in the CIP, or has been. One is the general fund dollars, and the other one is a grant. The chief has been applying for the Homeland Security grants for the tanker. Pumper tanker is what we want to move it over to instead of just a straight tanker. That is, spread across the United States. It's not a sure thing, but no grants typically are. So those are the 2 funding sources that we've identified for the fire apparatuses.
If you take a look at the spreadsheet and the summary that I forwarded on to you from Mr. Whipple, he had it laid out quite nicely. Current fleet information, Councilmember Clark, that was taken directly from the CIP. It had the initial purchase year, the projected replacement year, and the projected replacement cost at that time. And so I believe what Mr. Colburn is saying is we have that documented. It's been provided to us by the Planning Commission, approved by Council, and so it would be Council's responsibility to acknowledge that and factor in those replacement years at those replacement costs at the time that they are being recommended by our own CIP. So that would be, from my standpoint, what appears to be the plan moving forward after 2 years if we adopt this budget as proposed. Is there any discussion on the motion to set aside $600,000? Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just comment briefly on a few things. First of all, I want to say a word of thanks to Mr. Whipple for bringing what is obviously a very thoughtful proposal before the council. And I think it's something that not only we're considering tonight, but that we should continue to consider as we move forward. And I don't want whatever the outcome of our budget deliberations to mitigate the fact that this is something that I think warrants some additional consideration by the council, whether it's as a budgetary amendment or even as we prepare for the coming year's budget, that these are all things that we consider when we're talking about how to best serve the public. So I do want to thank Mr. Whipple for bringing this to our attention and to our consideration. Also, we all know that Councilmember Clark is a strong advocate for our fire department, and so I do thank him for that and for really making sure that we have these hard discussions and have these items that we look at and really toss around and kick the tires, so to speak. And so I appreciate his perspective, because without it, we all have different areas where we have expertise in, and then we bring that to the table and ask the council as a whole to consider that and then share our expertise on that. So I do appreciate his perspective, and even for making the motion tonight. I personally struggle with using $600,000 out of our fund balance within the current year's budget, based on how much it would take down our reserve balance, and not knowing all of the parameters that would affect the fund balance in out years, whether it's items that we want to consider or even just not knowing what revenues will be like in future years. I also think that while the current proposed budget may not be perfect or may not be perfect in addressing all of the needs of the fire department, I do believe that we do address a number of needs, including accelerating our payments on our current apparatus and putting in motion a plan to get 2 new apparatus over the course of 2 budget cycles. And then I revisited some of my notes as well, and this budget does make significant investments in terms of all of our public safety, but for our fire, in addition to the payments, we're also looking at our annual personal protection equipment. We're also looking at replacing 5 pagers and a radio. We're looking at purchasing a heart defibrillator for the department, and also maintaining about $30,000 in our equipment maintenance fund, which I understand could be sucked up by some of our older vehicles, but notwithstanding these few items and the movement that we're making on the fire apparatus, the new fire apparatus that we're looking to get, I do think that this budget places a significant impact a significant investment into our fire department. So while I do appreciate the conversation that we're having, and I hope that we will have it continuously in the future, and maybe even look at a work session where we can explore at a deeper level some of the different models that Mr. Smith has run, and also maybe look at alternatives that would incorporate components of Mr. Whipple's plan. But this council has set, as part of its goals and objectives, we've made it a priority to put a plan into place to schedule the replacement of all of our vehicles for the fire department. And I believe that this budget is a first step moving in that direction. There are other documents that will help us to address that, whether it be the capital improvements plan or even additional policy documents that we might develop in terms of moving forward with those apparatus. So at this time, I cannot support the amendment to the budget as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Mayor Waltz.
Councilmember Bruno.
Mayor Pro Tem Brown, did you make any response to Mayor Waltz's email about the Russ Whipple proposal that he sent to all of us, asking comments about?
Yes, to Councilmember Bruno, I did respond, and my response was that I was certainly open to having further conversation about the plan and possibly having a work session, but my understanding is that all of our availability in the short time span of 2 weeks was not such that we would have been able to have a special meeting to consider this request further.
Councilmember Bruno, I stand corrected. I did receive 2 responses, one in addition to yours, Mayor Pro Tem Brown's, but there was not any other interest sufficient to schedule a workshop, which had been my goal. This would have been, as Mr. Whipple said, quite easy to plug in numbers on a spreadsheet displayed on the wall and run through the scenarios and have somewhat of a solution in mind prior to sitting down to adopt the budget. So that did not happen, so we are struggling through that process tonight. Is there any other discussion on the motion to set aside $600,000? My comments are as follows. We have a finance director. He's had an opportunity to compare the impact this proposal would have on our fund balance, and without even getting 5 years out, it has us at less than, and this concerns me greatly, less than the recommended minimum fund balance that we should have on hand, which then suggests how else would we be funding this plan or any other emergency issues that arise in a city, emergency repairs. It could be anything, spiraling, legacy, pension costs, etc., short of going back to the people of the city and requesting a millage increase, which we had made a point of this budget for this fiscal year not to do. So as much as I would like to see something like this work in this form of setting aside a large sum of money versus what's been proposed to us to fund through low-interest loans, it's not sustainable as I crunch the numbers, from that standpoint either. And I do have a concern for that. However, I also feel that we should have the same commitment for replacing fire apparatus as we do any other wheeled vehicle, as it's been said, within the city. We should be aware of the capital improvement plan and the timelines that are there, aware that these costs are coming, and council should be committed to continue to work those in, as well as we've been able to work in the replacements that were scheduled for 2016 and 2017. At this point, I'll call the vote. All those in favor of setting aside $600,000 for fire department outlay signify by, is this for the motion on the resolution, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
We have a roll call vote, please. I think it's 4-3.
I think so. Yeah. Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
No.
Councilmember Bruno.
Yes.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Councilmember Drosha.
Yes.
Councilmember Ferris.
No.
Councilmember Mulvaney.
No.
Mayor Waltz.
No.
Motion fails.
Is there any discussion on the resolution to adopt the budget as already previously amended by Mayor Pro Tem Brown? Your time was just about up. Mayor Pro Tem.
Keep you guessing a little bit. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've certainly had a rich discussion tonight, and I won't belabor that discussion too much longer. I do want to say thank you to our city administrator, as well as to our finance director and our assistant finance director, who also had to step in throughout the budget process and really help us out. Any budget that we put together can be a daunting task. And as I look at this year's budget, I'm certainly appreciative of the work that our city administration has done to bring something to the table that is thoughtful and constructive. And quite frankly, what is finally on the table tonight, I think, is a fairly aggressive budget and places significant investment in our city services and ultimately the way that we provide those services to the residents. I was at a conference earlier today, and one of the quotes in a workshop was that with regard to budgeting, that we ought to purchase for results and not simply pay for the costs. And when I look at some of the things that we are doing in this year's budget, whether it's the addition of a police officer, whether it's ramping up our purchase of fire apparatus, or even implementing sidewalks on the western edge of town on West Columbia. I think these are all significant things that we're doing, and so many other things, equipment for fire, police, for DPW. We're making significant investments in our infrastructure and in the services that we provide. And also, I do have to say that I'm quite pleased that this year's budget has sidewalks on West Columbia because that's where I live and many of my neighbors as well. But I know that Councilmember Bruno has been a staunch advocate for this, and even before I was vocally supportive of it, Councilmember Bruno was ringing the bell. And so I do want to make sure that I thank him for his effort with regard to that, making sure that it was something that we talked about at our goals and objectives meeting, and making sure that it was something that we considered as part of this year's budget. So with that being said, I am delighted to support this year's budget because I think it's a strong investment in the future of our community, realizing that we still have more work to do. We may have more work to do with this budget in terms of future amendments, but I think it definitely sets us up in a good position to not only get a lot of things done this year, but to also still be in position to address unforeseen circumstances that may happen in future years and still have the possibility of doing some of our additional goals and objectives and wish lists, if you will. We do all of that without taking our fund balance significantly low and without placing additional burden on the residents with regard to our millage. And so for those reasons and many others, I will be voting yes in support of this year's budget. Thank you.
Any other comment? If this budget is approved as presented, I would respectfully ask that all city staff that keep this process in mind for next year. And if the proposal not able to work, come back to us with a proposal in the recommended budgets that does achieve the same objective of replacing fire apparatus on a regularly scheduled, not a surprise scheduled format, and a funding mechanism that does work, that does preserve what fund balance we can continue to maintain, if any, and councils can move forward and attempt to have the same result from that. All those in favor of Resolution 2015-22 as amended signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed?
No.
Resolution passes 5-2. Item 7D on the agenda is a motion to amend the intergovernmental agreement for building inspection services. Mr. Colburn.
Honorable Mayor and council members, I've been having discussions with Frank Walsh, who is the manager of Meridian Township. 4 years ago, approximately, they entered into an agreement with the City of Mason in regard to providing building inspection services. They basically have taken over and provided those services to the city. They had two different rates depending on the specific title that they had. The building inspectors were at $65 an hour and the building official at $75 an hour. In recent discussions with Mr. Walsh, they had discussed taking a percentage of the revenues that we bring in and had suggested 50%. As I started to discuss and make arguments, he had pointed out that if one had gone with a private company, oftentimes it's as much as 80%, and he was just suggesting 50%. I'd asked Mr. David Haywood, the Zoning and Development Director, to run the numbers, and which he'll give to you in a moment, but bottom line is that we'd suggested just a rate increase that would actually both benefit them and the city and still stay beneficial to the City of Mason overall, as our building picture still is fairly limited, and secondly is not near as extensive as Meridian Township. So at this point I have David Haywood, who's the Zoning and Development Director.
Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members, Mr. Colburn has done a good job in summarizing the situation. Basically what we're looking at is in 2014, we saw about $50,000 or $57,000 in revenue from permit fees, bumping up our expenditures from 2014 to at a $100 rate per hour would put us at about $21,000 in cost for inspection services. It's roughly a third. So we would be well under what we're seeing other communities look for in terms of sharing on those costs. So I think that it's a reasonable request. It keeps the company that we're currently working with. They do a really good job for us. One of the benefits that we have with contracting with Meridian Township is the building official lives in this community. I don't think we're going to get that with any other organization that we work with. He has his eyes on the community. He understands it well. He has a personal stake in the matter from that perspective. So I think from that sense, we're getting a personal touch to it. And like I said, we've been with them for 4 years and have had excellent service and very few issues with them. This time I'd take any questions or comments.
Are there any questions for Mr. Haywood? Councilmember Mulvaney.
Will this require that we raise inspection fees in any way, or don't you expect that?
I don't expect to do that. You know, it's a 33% increase, so I mean, we could, if we found that we needed to cover that additional cost, we could do that if it was in the interest of the council.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question, is this increase simply to cover the cost of doing business, or will the city realize any increased service levels as a result of the increase?
The service levels should not change. In your packet, there's a letter from Mr. Frank Walsh, the township manager. They are listing I'm quoting from his letter of April 27th. Over the last 4 years, the cost of the township for salaries, fuel, and vehicle maintenance have increased to a point where we cannot continue to do building inspections unless the service rate is amended.
Are there any other questions? Councilmember Grosha.
Are the number of our inspections at a level where we need to consider in the next year or two hiring our own building inspector again?
Our inspection numbers vary greatly from year to year. Some years we might see somewhat of a static change in the number of permits, but it really kind of depends on the type of permits that are issued in any given year, and from one year to the next they are somewhat different. We might have something like a Gestamp come in again next year where we need somebody on site quite often. So of course a facility like that would more than pay for itself, but yeah, I mean, when you get to about $20,000 you might start considering wrapping some of these previous services that were under the building official back into that position. We do have a personal touch from our current building official. However, if you had somebody in the office every day, it would be an additional service to the community, an expanded service in that sense. So you have to start weighing that. But I think we're close to that. If we continue to see growth as we have been seeing, in the next few years, it may be something we want to look at. Right now, I don't know that it's necessarily warranted at this point, but maybe in the next few years, if we continue to see our growth continue.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Haywood.
Thank you.
As always.
Mr. Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I move to approve the amendment to Exhibit A of the intergovernmental agreement for building inspection services with Meridian Township to increase the hourly service rate for both building inspector and building official to $100 per hour and authorize the city administrator to sign the agreement.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to amend the intergovernmental agreement for building inspection services as described. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Item 7E is a motion for to amend the oil and gas lease between the City of Mason and Northwood Energy Corporation. Mr. Colburn.
Honorable Mayor and council members, Hardy & Hardy Energy, Inc. is requesting an extension of the oil and gas lease from the property rights that the city holds of properties up north. This is part of the Rayner Trust that had been turned over to the city back in the early 60s. And the city has been very fortunate through many years and a number of contracts to benefit this fund through the investment of energy companies drilling and drawing oil and gas, and we get the royalties a percentage of that. As you may recall, in 2014, Hardy & Hardy came to the city in regard to requesting an extension. They've drilled 2 wells. They are having mixed results, but they're trying to work those particular properties so that they get better draws from them. They've forwarded the records of those wells here, and they've also been filed with the State of Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. This agreement would extend and is in accordance to the basic discussion we had with them last year, is if they continue to pursue their investments into the property, that they would be considered for a potential extension of the agreement, and that is what their request is, that they're asking for that extension of the agreement to go through May 9th, 2020. Obviously, they're trying to capitalize on their investment. This particular agreement was forwarded to the city attorney for review to make sure that it met the requirements. And as you know, oil and gas is a specific arena of law. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Hitch for any comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council, and City Administrator. I have reviewed the document. It appears to be in proper form. I have reviewed the history of the amendments, and these amendments track. So there's nothing out of the ordinary in this amendment. It's been the form, and as I've set out in the agreement, I've approved it as to form.
Thank you, Mr. Hitch. Are there any questions for either Mr. Colburn or Mr. Hitch?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Drosha.
I move to approve the extension of the oil and gas lease with Northwood Energy Corporation and provide for Mayor Waltz and City Administrator Colburn signature authority.
Second.
Motion's been made, seconded to approve the extension of oil and gas lease with Northwood Energy Corporation and provide myself, Mayor Waltz, and City Administrator Colburn signature authority. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Unfinished business. Councilmember Bruno.
No.
Councilmember Clark.
None.
Councilmember Ferris.
None.
Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
I have none.
Councilmember Mulvaney. Councilmember Drosha.
None.
Just one item for me. At the last council meeting, I requested a report from Mr. Hitch regarding West Bay and their exploration endeavors and the leases they were attempting to purchase. And he has indicated to me that that report is still in progress, but will be provided at the next council meeting, first council meeting in June. Thank you. Welcome. New business. Councilmember Bruno.
None.
Councilmember Clark.
Just a question, and that is to staff. Do we anticipate that the cemetery is going to be in any kind of shape for the upcoming holiday? I was down this weekend and have to say that it's probably the worst condition I've seen our cemetery in years. Spots where there's no grass. We have grass growing up over headstones. I was just really surprised it was in that bad a shape, and was wondering if we're going to be in shape, any kind of better shape for the Memorial Day holiday.
Right, we should be in pretty good shape. We just brought on the temporary hires this last week, so it does take a little bit of time for them to start catching up with all the different parks. As you know, we've got the parks to take care of as well as the cemetery. But the good news is that the temporary hires are on board now and starting to work.
I was just down there tonight, and it's mowed. It's not trimmed yet, but it was mowed.
New business, Councilmember Ferris.
That was my new business.
Pretty new. Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
I have no new business.
Councilmember Mulvaney. Councilmember Drosha.
Yes, just a quick question from anybody that knows. What is the process going forward for the food truck ordinance? How soon can we expect to see this get wrapped up?
Well, as you know, we did direct city staff at the meeting before last to begin working on a recommendation.
Yeah,
so,
what's the process?
There's an initial discussion in regard to the staff. However, the lead office, because the permits come from the office of the clerk, is the clerk's office. As you know, she has been handling the election, which had priority. So now this will rise to the top in terms of further discussions and implementation. Also, there'll be a discussion in regard to drawing information from the public as requested by City Council, so that'll be part of the process as well. In terms of timeline, I can't tell you that it'll be in final form by the next meeting because of the public process and calling for meetings with different groups. But it is now risen to the top to be worked on.
Thank you, Mr. Coburn. We're good. Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just add to that, since I was the one who made the request to staff, part of that request was to involve stakeholders, including groups like the Historic District Commission, the DDA, the Planning Commission, and on that specific note, I did raise this at the last Planning Commission meeting that at some level they would have an opportunity to provide some input on the crafting of an ordinance or a policy with that regard. And so I would hope that from the Planning Commission level that we would be looking at that potentially in our June or maybe our July meeting to give feedback subsequently to our staff and ultimately to the council. So I don't know how that fits into the larger time frame, but as the maker of the request, I didn't want to ensure that we had a wide breadth of stakeholders that were able to give input into what this policy should look like. Also, on a related note, had a conversation today with Mayor Triplett of East Lansing, and they've been dealing with this at some level, not only food trucks, but also food cart vendors. And he's going to share with me some of the policies and ordinances that they've crafted in East Lansing to look at this. And so I'm not saying that we should or should not go the route that they have, but it simply will be interesting to look at how one of our neighbors has handled this. And I will, once that information has been shared with me, I will certainly share it with administration and with my council colleagues.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. No other new business correspondence. You have your monthly revenue and expenditure report in the packet, an invitation to the 2015 LCC Aviation Technology Experience, and also you should have had in your email box the information forwarded from Mr. Whipple regarding his budget concepts, along with an invitation to consider a workshop. Liaison reports. Historic, Mr. Mulvaney.
No report.
Traffic, Councilmember Grosha.
We meet July 22nd.
Tree Commission, Councilmember Ferris.
The new street tree planting guide is out. There are 42 trees, as reported earlier, through the Legacy Tree Program, and it's listed on the website as to who put them and who they're in honor of. And that's about it till fall. There is still lots of time to get a tree planted this year as a legacy tree. Thank you.
And in fall, we'll have a leave commission.
There you go.
Okay. Planning Commission, Mayor Pro Tem Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very brief tonight. The Planning Commission met last Tuesday on May 12, 2015. With regard to our regular business, there were no site plans or items of that regard to consider. Our two items of regular business were to hear reports from both of our subcommittees. The first was a report from the Medical Marijuana Ordinance Subcommittee, the contents of which you heard tonight regarding the Planning Commission's request that Council extend the current moratorium for an additional 180 days. And our Zoning and Development Director presented that recommendation to Council. The second was the Sub-Area Planning Subcommittee report, and they are continuing the work at looking at different sub-areas within our current master plan that should be amended. And what that will be, it will be a smaller process from the full master plan process, but still similar nonetheless, because these sub-area plans will require an actual amendment to the master plan. And so our zoning director is in the process of drafting notices to share with our surrounding communities of our intent to plan in these sub-areas. And also during the month of June, the city and the Planning Commission will be conducting a public input process to garner feedback about how these two sub-areas might be continued in terms of their development. And just to remind everyone, the two areas that we're talking about are the Cedar Street interchange. So we're looking at Cedar Street essentially from 127 down to about Columbia Road. And then the second sub-area that we'll be looking at will be the Kip Road interchange from 127 down to about the fairgrounds. I think, is that the extent of the Kip Road one, Mr. Haywood? Near the airport, including the airport area as well. So there will be additional information on that in June as the Planning Commission continues the activity. It is the intent that this process will not nearly be as lengthy as the full master plan process, so I anticipate that council will be receiving sub-area plan amendments probably sometime in the latter portion of this year. And so I look forward to the discussion that will occur at this level regarding those two items. Other than that, there was no additional business at our Planning Commission meeting. I'm happy to entertain any questions or feedback that council members would care to offer.
Any questions for Mayor Pro Tem? DDA met last week and approved a motion approving their financial reports through April 30th of 2015. Also reviewed a report for the parking lot reconstruction of parking lot number 3 and approved the recommendation to go with Reith Riley to finish that project. The DDA also has a subcommittee, and the subcommittee is studying bike racks in the downtown area and have recommended replacement of the existing bike racks, pedestal-type bike racks that are there presently today with 7 of a variety that will resemble bicycles. Also reviewed the budget report for the period and received a report on the facade grant program, which is now available electronically online at the new DDA website. There was also a discussion of painting the lamp poles in the DDA. There's approximately 82. Seeing if that's your number 2, Councilmember Bruno.
That'll be close.
And a lively discussion on the trash cans situation as well. That concludes the DDA's report for the evening. Council member reports. Any council member have a report they wish to deliver this evening?
Mr. Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I referenced earlier that I attended a conference today. Every year, the governing magazine sponsors what's called the Michigan Leadership Summit, or the Michigan Leadership Forum. I had the opportunity to attend today, and I brought back to share with my colleagues the program from today's forum. In addition, I provided each council member with a copy of the latest edition of Governing Magazine. This organization puts on a lot of good seminars, and the fact that they target Michigan each year, they come here. We had a keynote from the governor. We had a keynote from thought leaders and experts on leadership and various policy areas that spoke, and there were breakout sessions on a lot of different subjects, from civic engagement and data to education reform, infrastructure, financing. So potholes and Prop 1 was post-mortem on Prop 1 was an interesting discussion. And so I just bring that to light because this is a wealth of information that occurs, and I hope that in the future that some additional members of this body will be able to attend. It's a free conference, and I will do my part next year to make sure that each of us is aware of when this is occurring, but it will be in May of 2016 here in East Lansing. So I have the program. If anyone would like to see it, I am glad to share. And the only other item I will mention is that our monthly meeting for the sesquicentennial had originally been postponed due to some scheduling conflicts, and we will now have that meeting next Wednesday on May 27th at 6:30 p.m., and we'll begin talking about the summer celebration, which will be July 2nd through 5th of this year. So hopefully we'll have people to come out, and looking forward to continuing our year-long celebration. And that is all for my council member report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Welcome. Any other council member reports? Administrators report. Mr. Colburn.
Honorable Mayor and council members, I'm excited to report to you the issuance and refunding of the bonds, working with the Building Authority as well as City Council. As you recall, we looked at refunding the bonds from 2010. This is in the Build America bonds, the BABS bonds, that were backed by the federal government. They were to pay 35% of the interest, and this past year they started not paying that full amount. So we took a look at the refunding, and as you may recall, Mike Greshams, the city bond attorney, made a report a couple months ago, and we've gone through that process after being authorized by City Council to go ahead and reoffer that issue. That being said, I'm pleased to announce that the new bonds were sold with the total savings of $248,085.31. Now, granted, this is spread out over a 25-year period, but that's a significant savings over that period of time in the lifespan of that particular bond. It averages out of a little over $9,900 annually in regard to the savings. So I'm very appreciative of Mark Howe, who serves on the Building Authority, and the fact that we've gone through this process. Tom Tracyak, our financial planner, Mike Greshams, and the City Council, you have saved the city approximately $250,000 over the next quarter century, so that's good news. That being said, on legacy trees, I know we've been discussing that. 42 of them have been planted to date, and this is tied to the sesquicentennial, and they've been planted around the city. People have been able to make a donation of $150 and name the species of the tree and the location, and as Councilmember Ferris referenced, that's now been placed on the website so people can go see what type of tree and where they had it planted and who it may be in the honor of and such. So we're pleased, and there's still an opportunity for people to make those donations. Had just in the last few days, 3 more trees discussed with us on adding to that. And we can do another planting this fall, so great opportunity. A couple of other items that I have. Moving forward with the sesquicentennial, we did pull up the time capsule. Unfortunately, it was wet. There was some damage, but we were able to salvage a lot of it. The Historical Society, 2 members came in to help document all of that for us and to clean it up, dry it out, and so there'll be distribution in the very immediate future. Unfortunately, a little bit of it was lost, but the vast majority of it has been saved, possibly a little rougher for wear. And that'll go to the distribution of the citizens who put them in there. We're asking that they consider allowing us to document the full thing, but because many of these are personal letters, we dried them out but did not read them, and they will have that opportunity to make the decision themselves. So that'll be happening in the very near future. Also, as you may be aware, I have been given an offer from Traverse City in regard to employment. I wanted to give you an update of that situation, as I have not submitted a resignation to you. Basically, they're going through the process in regard to making an offer, having me go through physical background checks, not unlike what the City of Mason did when I came here. So that being said, I did say yes to that offer, and I wanted you to know that I am proceeding forward with their process, and we'll let you know how that evolves. Assuming that all goes well, I will be submitting a resignation to you in the near future. I thank you for the opportunity to serve.
We thank you as well, Mr. Colburn, and also for the report this evening. Any questions for Mr. Colburn? Mayor Pro Tem. I should have known.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to, less a question, more a comment, echo what Mayor Waltz has said to Mr. Colburn, in that first, congratulations on this professional opportunity for you and also personal opportunity for your family. I personally am grateful for the many years of service that you have given to the city, and so it's easy for us to get wrapped up in the what do we do next, but I do want to take a moment to make sure that we say thank you, because you have given this city many years of both your personal and professional life, and this council member, on behalf of several residents, would like to express our sincere thanks. I do want to say that we have a daunting task in front of us to replace Mr. Colburn, and that being said, once the motion is set forth with the official resignation, I would ask for our council to undertake a work session so that we can get on the same page with regard to how we should best execute the search process. And I believe, as would be appropriate, city administration would prepare maybe some historical documents and recommendations at that time. But I simply wanted to put it out there that as we move forward with this, I think that before we take any formal actions, we ought to meet in a work session to hash out some of our different ideas regarding the executive search process. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. At this point, item 14 on the agenda, we've amended to include a presentation. So it is my pleasure to welcome back my former colleague, who is now County Commissioner, representing us in District 14 for Ingham County, Ms. Robin Naert.
Good evening. Hi. Hello. Oh, I'm going to be about 20 seconds, I think. Robin Naert, 501 Riverwalk. I am your County Commissioner. I want to congratulate you too, Marty, and I'm sure I'll be here to congratulate you further. I just wanted to give the council a quick update. Had I known it was going to be such a late night, I can't typically get here to your council meetings because I have a human services meeting at the same time on the south side of Lansing, where all the county commission meetings are except the full board. So it's a little hike sometimes. I just wanted to update you what my priorities are, and Marty and I have had this discussion early on, but my priorities as a new commissioner, and we are partisan, it's a partisan board, but my goal is to establish relationships. I think that's necessary in a minority role that I'm in on the commission, and in order to see things happen in the rural part of Ingham County, which we are a part of. So my priorities are rural health care. I firmly believe that the county should help fund rural health care, and I think that should be centered in Mason as the pocket for the outside rural area. I'm concerned about the jail and the process that's happening. The RFPs came in, and those interviews will start tomorrow and Wednesday to discuss what's going to be the next step in that jail bid, and I have let them know in no uncertain terms that if there's any discussion to move the jail from the city of Mason, that property absolutely needs to be remediated so that the city of Mason could have a viable piece of property to use and not a vacant, empty jail, which no one would use for anything. And then the third thing is the trails and parks, and Councilmember Ferris has been a good spokesman for you on the parks issues. But unfortunately, it's going to focus mainly on trails. I have put a proposal forward that the commission use that money perhaps for small grants that are available to communities in the rural areas to use so that they can connect trails to existing trails like Mason's. I know that we have a good plan forward for the continuation of the Hayhoe Riverwalk, and I do believe I believe that will be a part of it. I can't say for certain, though. Dealing with the current health care millage that was approved, a continuation, a 3-year millage that was approved by the voters of Ingham County, not many in this area, though, that would provide health care services for low income and people who need services that do not meet the the American Health Care Act, commonly referred to as Obamacare. And then you may have heard an issue recently as today, about an issue with some missing money that's unaccounted for in the county budget. It's $167,000 in a $120 million budget. It's really not that big a drop in the bucket. But in my opinion, I'm on the Finance Committee, and it's $167,000 of all our money, and all the people that you represent and that I represent in the county, and it's a big deal for an office that is responsible for the money for the county to come short like that. So just wanted to update you. My contact information hasn't changed. If anybody needs to contact me about anything, I'm available. There. Thanks. Any questions, call me. Don't talk to me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Nair. On that note, we are adjourned.
Just a second. Mayor Pro Tem, there's something you need to learn. It's